So this morning, we are here to celebrate. And you know, as I was thinking about celebration this week, I started to notice that it's hard to think about celebration. It's hard to talk about celebration without having first reflected on gratitude. I mean, think about it. Think about your most poignant moments of celebration. Whether that be birthdays or anniversaries, or graduations, and the times when you gathered with friends and family, community. And weren't those celebrations tied to a profound sense of gratitude? And here we are celebrating this morning. We're celebrating the barriers coming down. We're celebrating the gifts that are being given to sustain and give new life to this community. We're celebrating Reverend Jessica's installation here at St. Luke's. And I just want to take a moment and revisit our Galatians 1 Love series, and something I noticed throughout this series that we've been doing for the last 6 weeks. You know, you may remember, Sam mentioned it in the children's time, but you may remember towards the end of each service we had storytellers share a piece of their story. Coming from you all, the community, this congregation. And y'all were brave and vulnerable. You shared your story with us. You trusted us, this community, with your vulnerability. And in talking with you all, and more of you, hearing about the barriers you're facing in life, the barriers that are coming down in your lives in this community, I think y'all were hitting on something really important. You were demonstrating that it's God's power, a power greater than yourself, that it's the power of connecting in a community, and these are the things that allow us to face things like fear, anxiety, ego, expectations, complacency. These are the things that allow us to see these barriers crumble. And for me, this has everything to do with gratitude. A power greater than ourselves, allowing us to be one. So what I'd like to do with you this morning is just share with you a few observations that I've made on gratitude. And then I want to share with you a couple of stories along the way, and then we'll get on with celebrating. 4 observations, and I'm going to breeze through these. I'm not going to provide commentary because I think they're self-evident and they'll make sense as we go. But observation number 1. Gratitude is a way of life, and gratitude must be practiced. Observation 2. When we come to the realization that life is a gift from God, that this breath is all we have, this moment is all we have, gratitude is usually the response. Observation 3. Gratitude is the thing that allows us to hold life loosely and with an openness, because gratitude realizes that the whole thing could fall apart at any moment. And let me pause there for just a moment and say a word about that. See, I'm not talking about the negative, like the thing that's rooted in fear. You know that voice that gets stuck right up here when things are going well? And that voice says to you, man, you don't really deserve this. Man, you're not really good enough to get that. I mean, come on. You know the next shoe is going to drop at any moment. Everything's going to fall south at any moment. That's rooted in fear, and we're getting rid of the barrier in fear. So I'm talking about the thing that's rooted in the gift, realizing that life is a gift and living out of that gift. Are you with me? Yes. All right. Jim's getting it. All right, this is good. Observation number 4, and the final observation. Gratitude always remembers the backstory. So let me tell you about my friends Jim and Linda. Jim and Linda have been in our Y group for the past 6 weeks. And in this Y group, my wife Tammy and I are leading this in our home. And we've been having about 20 people just gather in the living room. And we are figuring out our whys together. Our last gathering was last week. But we've essentially been asking the question of why. Why are you who you are? Why do you do the things you do? Why are you passionate about the things that you're passionate about? And what we discovered is doing this in a small community, this is really powerful. Because when you can discover your whys, you're usually more intentional in the things you say yes to and the things you say no to. And that happens to be really important. But Jim on the very first week, and we didn't know Jim and Linda prior to this group, but we're getting to know them. On the very first week, Jim was talking about the importance of celebrating life. Oh, well, we just celebrate life. That's what we do. And when this thing comes along, we just celebrate life. And you know what you got to do. You just got to celebrate life. I mean, this guy sounded like a broken record. And you wanted to say to yourself, come on, Jim. You know it's not all about celebration. You know there is some pain and suffering and grief along the journey. Come on. Yeah, well, and then Jim shared his story. And a big piece of his story is several years ago, his wife was diagnosed with a terminal cancer, and she passed away from this cancer. Time went on, and then Jim remarried. Jim married Linda. And just a couple of years ago, Linda was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. And here they are sitting in our living room, laughing and smiling and talking with all seriousness about the importance of celebrating life and how they celebrate life. And you know what? It was never the big moments. It wasn't the big moments that they celebrated. It was the simple things. Simple life celebrations, like every Sunday morning going to Einstein Bagels to share a bagel together. Making it a priority to have breakfast together every morning. Making it a priority to build a relationship with their grandbabies and spend time with them. Jim even said at one point, he said, you know, sometimes we even skip church because we got to celebrate life. Yeah, you go, man. You go, brother. Why would they talk about celebrating life? Why is this so important to Jim? Gratitude. Gratitude is a way of life, and it's practiced. Gratitude realizes that life is a gift, and this breath, this moment, is all we have. And gratitude is the thing that allows us to hold life loosely and with an openness. And gratitude always remembers the backstory. Gratitude always remembers the backstory. Isn't it true? So in 12-step meetings of recovery, there's a tradition of celebrating birthdays or milestones of sobriety. And the tradition is you celebrate 30, 60, 90 days, 4 months through 12 months, 1 year through multiple years. And the tradition is that when you're the one celebrating, you get a coin, a chip. It's a metal coin type thing. And oftentimes in these meetings, that person will share a piece of their story. Here's a story I've never heard from the person receiving the gift. Never heard this story. Well, apparently I must be pretty awesome. Apparently, when hard things come along, I can just muster up the strength and press on through. Never heard that story. But you know what story I hear time and time again? It's a story filled with a deep sense of gratitude. Because you know, if it wasn't for power greater than yourself, if it wasn't for God's liberation, you wouldn't be here in this moment with these people receiving such a gift. And you know that if it wasn't for these people in this room, your comrades in the journey walking through it with you, then you know you wouldn't be here in this moment with these people receiving such a gift. It's gratitude because you remember what it was like, but you also know what it's like now. Gratitude always remembers the story. So there's this book of Deuteronomy. In the book of Deuteronomy, there's the great prophet Moses, and he's explaining to the people what it means to have life with God, explaining to them what it means to walk the way of God. And Deuteronomy, keep in mind, it's the 5th book of the first 5 books of the Bible, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. It's part of the Torah. We've been talking a little bit about the Torah. So it goes Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, then Deuteronomy. And in chapter 24, you get a set of instructions. And here's how these instructions read, starting in verse 19. Whenever you are reaping the harvest of your field, and you leave some grain in the field, don't go back and get it. Let it go to the immigrants, the orphans, and the widows, so that the Lord your God blesses you in all that you do. Similarly, when you beat the olives off the olive trees, don't go back over them twice. Let the leftovers go to the immigrants, the orphans, and the widows. Again, when you pick your grapes off your vines, off your vineyard, don't pick them over twice. Let the leftovers go to who? The immigrants, the orphans, and the widows. Now let's pause there for just a moment before we go to the next verse. Imagine you are one of these vineyard owners, or you are one of these field owners, and you have given your life to this thing. You have poured out your blood, sweat, and tears. You have given your time, energy, your money to these fields or these vineyards because this is your livelihood. This is literally the sustenance for you and your family. And then someone comes along and says, hey, by the way, when you plowed that row, and then you come back and you noticed you missed a corner or you missed an edge, don't go back over it. Just leave that corner, leave that edge for people who need it, the widows, the orphan, and the immigrants. And by the way, when you're shaking your olive tree, and these olives are falling off, and you're gathering the olives, and then you look up and you notice there's still more olives, don't reach for those olives. Leave those for the people who really need it, like the immigrants, the orphans, and the widows. And when you go into your vineyards and you pick the grapes, and a worker comes back and tells you there's still more grapes to pick, no, just leave those grapes. Leave those for the immigrants, the orphans, and the widows. I mean, come on, Moses. That's not fair. Why would Moses command this? Very next verse, verse 22. Remember how you were a slave in Egypt. That's why I am commanding you to do this thing. So check it out. These are the Israelites we're talking about here. They were slaves in Egypt, living under the oppressive rule of Pharaoh, and they were rescued and freed from their slavery. God heard their cries, and God liberated them. Now, here's what makes this passage really fascinating. Moses said this to the Israelites while they were still wandering in the desert. I mean, do you remember their story? They were in slavery, rescued, then they wandered in the desert for many, many years, and then before they went to the new land, which they often refer to as the promised land. So to these poor, wandering, former slaves, Moses gives instructions about what to do with the grains, the olives, and the grapes that they don't yet have. It's almost like Moses is saying to them, look, guys, it's not always going to be this way. In fact, soon, someday, things are going to change, and we're going to make it into this new land. And when we get there, you're going to have some things. You are going to begin building homes. You are going to settle in this place. And many of you will have fields and vineyards. And when you do, don't forget your story. Because the danger is you're going to forget Egypt. The danger is you're going to forget your own liberation. It's the danger that comes along with success. Remember what it was like. Remember what Egypt was like. And then give in gratitude. Practice it. Leave that food behind. Because when you do, you are welcoming suffering into your midst. You are welcoming those who need that food most. This scripture is an invitation to put out the welcome sign for the suffering. It's an invitation. This scripture says when you've been given a gift, the only way to really keep that gift is to live with an openness and to give that gift away. This passage is essentially a warning about what happens when you lose your sense of gratitude, when you forget your story. So a friend of mine, he talks about the difference of being thankful and being grateful. And here's how he says it. He says, when we are thankful, it is enough to say thank you. But if we claim to be grateful, we have spent some of our time in search of suffering, so we might have the opportunity to pass on to them what has been so freely given us. I mean, dang. Who wants to spend time searching out for suffering in the world? But that's the thing about gratitude, isn't it? Because gratitude reminds us we better go out and find suffering in the world. Because if we don't, we just might be miserable. And gratitude reminds us, I can't keep it all to myself. I've been given too many gifts along the way. I've been given too much grace along the journey. When it comes to my fields and my vineyard, I can't help but give back. So this is the Sunday where we are wrapping up our stewardship campaign. And we brought the box to the altar because this too is given to God, the gifts. And I realize that many of you have placed your pledge card in this box over the last 6 weeks because we have kept it very intentionally in front of the sanctuary doors. And some of you have waited because this is your Sunday and this is the Sunday for you that you want to put your pledge card in the box. If that's you, or if you happen to remember your card this morning, I invite you to come forward during this song that Jim is going to play and place it in the box. The kids will be joining us because they have pledge cards. They've been doing their own campaign downstairs and considering what gifts they may use and give. And so let me close with this. When it comes to giving, I hope you give generously. I mean, that's important, right? Generous giving is important. But I also hope you give out of a sense of gratitude because you have a story here at St. Luke's. And you remember that story. And a big piece of the story here for us is going to be to continue watching barriers crumble. It's going to be to continue welcoming suffering into our midst. And every time we see a barrier crumble, every time we welcome suffering in, we experience gratitude. And when we experience gratitude, we celebrate. Amen.